They never expected it to hit them like this. Not now, not after everything that happened, not after convincing themselves for so long that walking away was the right decision. They thought distance would give them peace, that silence would make things easier, that closing the door on what the two of you had would free them from the emotional intensity that scared them so deeply. But what they didn't understand then is something they can finally feel now. Your love had a presence, and the absence of that presence is louder than anything they've ever known. For the first time, they're not running from the memories. The memories are running toward them, and there's nowhere left to hide. It starts subtly, the way it always does for someone who avoids closeness. At first, they tell themselves they're fine. They distract themselves, they stay busy, they scroll. They laugh around people who don't know their inner world well enough to notice the cracks. They pretend that everything is normal. They pretend losing you didn't shake something inside them. They pretend they're not thinking about the moments when your presence softened the parts of them they never show anyone. They pretend they're not comparing every new face, every new conversation, every forced smile to the depth you gave so effortlessly. But denial can only stretch so far before reality snaps back. And the moment it does, it's overwhelming. It comes late at night, when everything is quiet and their distractions can't protect them. It comes in the form of a memory they never invited in, your voice, your warmth, the way you made them feel seen without them needing to explain themselves. It's a memory they had pushed aside, ignored, dismissed, minimized, but now suddenly it feels like a weight dropping into their chest. And for the first time, they feel something they've spent years trying to avoid, the truth. They realize no one has ever loved them the way you did. They're not ready to say it out loud, not even to themselves, but the realization lives inside them, like a secret they can't escape. What they once called too much now feels like the exact thing they're starving for. The emotional depth that scared them now feels like a rare treasure. All the warmth they ran from is the same warmth they now crave. They remember the way you showed up, not perfectly, but wholeheartedly, the way you tried, the way you gave, the way you cared, even when they pushed you away, even when their walls made love feel like a battlefield. And they feel a sting in their chest, a sting that comes from understanding something deeply uncomfortable. Nobody loves them with that level of sincerity. Nobody understands their unspoken feelings. Nobody pays attention to their small emotional shifts the way you did. Nobody looks at them the way you used to, with softness, with patience, with a kind of love that wasn't transactional or conditional. You never wanted anything from them. You just wanted to give, to connect, to build something real. And in a world where most people only give half of themselves, your love was a rarity. Deep down, they always sensed that. But fear has a way of twisting the truth. When they had you, the intensity felt overwhelming. They weren't equipped to handle someone who loved wholeheartedly without flinching. So instead of leaning in, they pulled away. Instead of appreciating the depth, they labeled it as pressure. Instead of recognizing the connection, they convinced themselves it was too much, too fast, too emotional, anything to avoid admitting that closeness terrifies them. Because closeness means vulnerability, and vulnerability means being seen, and being seen means risking rejection. So they rejected you first, thinking it would protect them. They never realized it would end up hurting them more than they ever expected. But time has a way of uncovering truths, and the truth is becoming impossible for them to ignore. They start noticing how empty conversations with others feel. They start noticing how quickly they lose interest. They start noticing how every new person lacks the emotional safety that came naturally with you. And even though they would never admit this to anyone, even though they would never dare reach out and confess it, they feel something sinking in their stomach whenever someone tries to love them in a surface-level way. Because deep down they know what real depth feels like, because you showed them. They begin to realize that most people can only love them halfway. Most people never get close enough to understand the layers beneath the silence. Most people don't read the pauses, the micro-expressions, the emotional signals they subconsciously send out. You did. You didn't just listen to their words, you heard their unspoken feelings. You didn't just care about the version they showed to the world, you cared about the parts they kept hidden. You didn't just love them, you understood them. And that kind of emotional understanding is impossible to replace. This realization doesn't hit them like a single dramatic moment. It grows slowly, like a shadow stretching across their thoughts. At first they try to push it away. They tell themselves it's just nostalgia, just loneliness, just timing. They tell themselves they'll forget it. They try to distract themselves. They try to pretend you were just another chapter. But when someone has felt genuine emotional connection, forced replacement never works. The heart knows the difference between real and artificial, between deep and shallow, between safe and temporary. And so the comparison begins, not because they want to compare, but because the difference is undeniable. Every time someone new laughs, they notice it doesn't feel the same. Every time someone tries to get close, they feel the urge to pull back. Every time someone says something kind, they remember how your kindness felt different, more sincere, more personal, more emotionally rooted. And even though they would never say these words out loud, the truth whispers in the back of their mind, "No one loves me like they did." But this realization comes with a painful twist. It's not just about missing you, it's about realizing they never truly appreciated what they had. They thought your depth was a problem. They thought your care was an inconvenience. They thought your consistency was something they could always return to later when they were ready. They didn't understand that emotional availability isn't a switch that waits for them. They didn't understand that love, once neglected, changes. It evolves. It grows wiser. It grows stronger. And sometimes it moves on. They replay moments in their mind, moments they brushed off at the time but now feel heavy with meaning. The way you looked at them, the way you stayed, the way you listened, even when they couldn't find the right words, the way you loved them, even in their withdrawn moments, even in their silence, even in the emotional distance they created. They remember the moments when you asked them if they were okay, and instead of letting you in, they shut down. They remember the moments when you tried to get closer, and instead of embracing it, they pulled away. They remember all the times they felt fear and mistook it for lack of love. They remember all the times they felt overwhelmed and mistook it for incompatibility. They remember all the times they ran, thinking distance was the solution. Now they see that the real fear wasn't losing you. The real fear was feeling something real, and they didn't know how to handle that. But now, sitting with the emptiness, the silence, the comparisons, the late-night thoughts, they feel something new, something unavoidable. Regret. Not just regret that you're gone, but regret that they never let themselves fully experience what you offered. Regret that they never allowed themselves to reciprocate the depth they now desperately miss. Regret that they ran from the very thing they now wish they could run back to. They finally understand what you gave them. They finally understand how rare your love was. And they finally understand that no matter how many new faces they meet, no matter how many conversations they distract themselves with, no matter how many times they convince themselves they're fine, there is a truth they can no longer escape. No one will love them like you did. Not because you were perfect, but because you loved with a depth they weren't ready for, a depth they never thought they needed, a depth they now realize they may never experience again with anyone else. They try to go on with life as if nothing has shifted, but something inside them feels different now, heavy, unsettled, impossible to silence. At first they tell themselves it's just nostalgia, a normal reaction, a temporary wave of emotion. But deep down, they know this isn't temporary. This isn't nostalgia, this is something deeper, something they've never had to confront before. It's the collision of a truth they've avoided for far too long. The love they walked away from wasn't ordinary, and the connection they dismissed wasn't replaceable. What they're feeling now is the slow unraveling of their emotional defenses, the same defenses that convinced them you cared too much when in reality you cared exactly the right amount. They begin questioning everything, especially themselves. The walls they once relied on so confidently feel less like protection and more like a cage they locked themselves inside. They wonder why they pushed away the one person who saw past those walls. They wonder why they couldn't let themselves soften when your presence invited nothing but safety. They wonder why the love that asks for authenticity is the same love that used to terrify them. And with every thought, every memory, every emotional echo of what the two of you once had, the truth becomes clearer. You weren't the one who was too much, or they simply weren't ready for something real. But this realization doesn't bring them peace. It brings discomfort, confusion, and a quiet kind of heartbreak. The kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from losing you, because in their mind, they always believed they could come back. No matter how far they drifted, no matter how long they stayed distant, no matter how many times they shut the door, they believed you would always be on the other side waiting. It wasn't arrogance, it was their lack of emotional self-awareness. It was their misunderstanding of how love actually works. They thought your love was unshakable, unconditional, permanent. They never considered the possibility that you would eventually heal. They never imagined you could outgrow them. They never saw a reality where your heart learned to protect itself. Now they sit with the weight of that realization. Now they feel the shift. Now they begin to understand that love doesn't wait forever, not even the kind of love that once felt infinite. And that is when the internal conflict begins. It's a silent battle, the kind they tell no one about. On one side is their ego, the part that insists they made the right decision, that they're better off alone, that emotions are messy and relationships are too demanding. But on the other side is the truth that whispers louder each day, the truth that reminds them of the emotional intimacy they once had, the truth that tells them they lost something meaningful, something genuine, something rare. They long for the connection they once rejected. They crave the closeness they once feared. They miss the emotional depth they once avoided. And yet, they still don't know how to admit this to themselves. They still don't know how to express what they're feeling. They've spent their whole life avoiding emotional vulnerability, not because they don't want love, but because they don't know how to sit with the intensity of it. Love makes them feel exposed. Love makes them feel unprotected. Love forces them to acknowledge the wounds they've never healed. And when it comes to the kind of love you offered, the intensity was too overwhelming for them to handle. So instead of allowing themselves to fully process the regret and longing, they distance from their own emotions. But emotions aren't something they can outrun forever. The more they resist, the stronger the memories become. The more they deny missing you, the more your presence echoes through their quiet moments. The more they push away the truth, the more that truth pushes back. The memories come in waves, uninvited but persistent. Your voice, your laughter, the way your energy felt when you entered a room. The way you looked at them with eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. The way you reached for them gently, as if you knew exactly how fragile their heart was. The way your presence made them feel something they couldn't name at the time. They didn't realize it was love. They didn't realize it was connection. They didn't realize it was safety. Now, looking back, the meaning becomes painfully clear. The memories they once buried now bloom with vivid clarity. They remember the small moments, the ones they brushed off or took for granted. The way you noticed their mood before they said a word. The way you cared about small details they assumed no one would ever pay attention to. The way your affection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, steady, patient, grounded. They begin to miss things they never appreciated. They miss the conversations that flowed effortlessly. They miss the emotional warmth that filled the space between you. They miss the feeling of being understood without explanation. They miss the comfort of your presence, the way your love wrapped around them like a blanket they didn't know they needed. And for the first time, they realize how rare it is to find someone who truly sees you, someone who sees not only the best parts, but also the scared, insecure, unhealed parts, and chooses you anyway. This realization shakes them. It breaks down a part of their emotional distance. It forces them to confront the truth they tried to run from. But the most painful part, it's the moment they recognize that replacing you isn't possible, not because you were perfect, but because your connection wasn't manufactured, it was real. And real connection cannot be replicated with convenience or chemistry or temporary comfort. Real connection leaves an imprint. Real connection shapes the emotional blueprint of the heart. Real connection becomes a reference point, and everything after it feels different. This is the moment when they begin comparing every new person to you. Not intentionally, not consciously, but instinctively. They notice how conversation feels forced with others. They notice how affection feels unfamiliar. They notice how emotional closeness feels distant and fragile. They notice how something is missing, something they can't find in anyone else, something they didn't even realize you provided so naturally. They begin to understand that love isn't about finding someone new who checks the right boxes. Love is about connection. Love is about emotional resonance. Love is about feeling safe enough to be yourself. And the painful truth is that they haven't been able to feel that with anyone else. The moment this realization lands, everything shifts. They begin to feel the weight of losing something irreplaceable. They begin to feel the consequences of choosing distance over connection. They begin to feel the regret of pushing away the one person who gave them a kind of love they never believed they deserved. Their defenses, once so strong and impenetrable, start to crumble. They break in human moments, in the kind of moments they can't hide from. The quiet morning when they wake up and feel the emptiness. The random moment during the day when a small reminder pulls your memory to the front of their mind. The night when loneliness grows louder than their pride. The conversations with new people that leave them feeling hollow and unfulfilled. It hits them hardest when they finally allow their mind to wander into the truth. You didn't just love them, you understood them. And they didn't just lose a partner, they lost emotional safety, emotional presence, emotional truth. Now they sit with a kind of longing they don't know how to put into words. They wonder what life would look like if they hadn't pushed you away. They wonder who they might have become if they had let themselves grow with you. They wonder whether you still think of them, or whether your heart learned to stop waiting. The realization that no one will love them the way you did isn't a moment, it's a slow, unfolding truth. A truth they can't escape, a truth that grows heavier with time, a truth that finally breaks through every wall they spent years building. They never thought they'd miss you like this. They never thought they'd regret losing you. They never thought your love would become the standard they measure all others against. But here they are, finally understanding the depth of what they once had, but far too late to hold it with both hands. The truth stands unshakable before them now. The love they walked away from is the love they now crave more than anything. And they know, with a painful clarity, that no one will ever love them the way you did. They don't tell anyone what's happening inside them. They wouldn't dare. People around them would never believe it anyway. They've always been the strong one, the distant one, the independent one, the one who never needed anyone, never showed weakness, never allowed their feelings to surface long enough to be noticed. They've always worn their emotional armor with such conviction that even they started believing they were untouchable. But now the truth sits quietly in their chest, like a weight they can't lift. The truth is that they miss you in a way that shakes them, not because they're lonely, not because they're bored, not because they want attention, but because the love you gave them is something they've never been able to replicate, no matter how many walls they built or how many people they met. The depth you offered, effortlessly, consistently, sincerely, was something they didn't know how to receive at the time. And now, standing on the other side of the choices they made, they feel the emptiness that comes from pushing away something real. They never told you how much your presence impacted them. They never admitted how safe they felt in your energy, even when they kept their emotions locked away. They never shared how deeply your compassion affected them, or how your patience softened the edges of their harsh inner world. They kept those truths tucked inside, convincing themselves that acknowledging them would make them vulnerable, would make them open, exposed, dependent. And they believed vulnerability was dangerous. But the truth they'll never tell anyone, perhaps not even themselves, is that your love changed them. It shifted the way they understood connection. It showed them what emotional intimacy is supposed to feel like. It revealed the kind of comfort that doesn't drain or suffocate, but heals. And it terrified them more than they'll ever admit. They carry the guilt of that now, quietly, silently, hidden behind a controlled expression and a life that appears normal on the outside. But inside, the guilt stings, because they know how much you cared, how hard you tried, how deeply you loved, and they know how many times they shut you out when you were trying to get close. They know how many times they stayed silent when you needed communication. They know how many times they pulled away when all you wanted was to hold them a little closer. They remember the look on your face when you were trying to understand why they couldn't let you in. They remember the softness in your eyes when you still chose love over frustration. They remember the moments when you reached out your hand, and they pretended not to notice the emotional courage it took for you to do that. And now they wonder how many chances you gave them that they didn't appreciate. How many times you offered understanding they didn't deserve. How many moments they ruined because fear controlled their reactions. These thoughts return to them often, more often than they want to admit, not in a torturous way, but in a reflective way. A way that shows them the kind of person they could have grown into if they hadn't run from you. A way that highlights the difference between what they thought they needed and what they actually needed all along. But the regret they feel isn't loud, it's quiet Quiet regret is the kind that stays. It's the kind that whispers in the back of their mind when they least expect it. It's the kind that shakes them awake in the middle of the night. It's the kind that follows them in conversations with new people, reminding them of what they once had and didn't know how to nurture. They begin to realize that regret doesn't always come with dramatic emotions. Sometimes regret is simply the understanding that you were the calm they never recognized, the peace they never embraced, the softness they never allowed themselves to lean into. This realization grows heavier when nighttime comes. Nighttime is dangerous for someone like them because the distractions fade and their mind begins to wander. They lie there in the dim light, staring at the ceiling, and your memory fills the silence. Not the arguments, not the endings, not the confusion, but the moments that brought them comfort. Your voice saying their name gently, the way you looked at them like they mattered, the way your energy wrapped around them like a quiet shelter. The night brings clarity they don't get during the day. It's in the stillness that they finally allow themselves to feel the full weight of your absence. They remember the warmth of lying next to you, the softness of your touch, the emotional familiarity that made them feel understood even when they said nothing. They remember the long conversations that felt timeless, the laughter that rose effortlessly, the tenderness you brought into their life. And they realize something painful: no one else has ever made them feel that kind of peace. They didn't know how important that peace was until they lost it. They didn't understand the value of emotional safety until they felt the coldness of life without it. They didn't appreciate the consistency of your love until their nights became filled with uncertainty and a longing they can't put into words. Now, underneath their guarded exterior, they feel the ache of what they lost. They feel the sting of every missed opportunity. They feel the emptiness that follows someone who loved deeply and left nothing but a silent space behind. They once believed they functioned best alone. Now alone feels different. Alone feels heavy. Alone feels like a consequence rather than a choice. This is when they begin to understand why they couldn't appreciate you when they had you. Because appreciation requires presence. Appreciation requires honesty. Appreciation requires emotional availability. And they weren't ready back then. Not because of you, but because of the unresolved wounds they were carrying. Wounds that taught them to fear love, to question affection, to pull back when something felt too real. They start to realize their avoidance wasn't about you at all. It was a reflection of their past. A reflection of the fears they inherited long before they met you. A reflection of the emotional battles they've been fighting silently for years. You didn't scare them. The idea of being loved scared them. The idea of being truly seen scared them. The idea of letting someone close enough to hurt them terrified them. Now looking back, they understand how unfair that was to you, to themselves, to the love you shared. And yet, in the midst of all this regret, something else rises within them, the memory of how your love made them feel alive. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't chaotic. It was steady, grounding and real. Your love didn't demand anything from them. It didn't suffocate. It didn't overwhelm. It simply reminded them that they weren't alone. It reminded them that someone cared enough to stay, that someone cared enough to try, that someone cared enough to fight for connection, even when they felt unworthy of it. They start to feel the emotional echo of your love, the imprint it left, the way their heart reacts whenever a memory surfaces. You became part of their emotional landscape, even when they were doing everything to block you out. They didn't realize it at the time, but your presence settled into the quietest corners of their being. It shaped the way they experience connection now. It shaped the way they understand love. It shaped the way they measure emotional safety. And now, as they navigate their days with this awareness growing inside them, they begin to understand that your imprint isn't something they can erase. It wasn't supposed to be erased. It was supposed to teach them something. It was supposed to be a mirror. It was supposed to be a transformation. They finally see how deeply you touched their life, even if they didn't show it. They finally feel the impact of your love, even if they didn't say it. They finally recognize the rarity of what the two of you had, even if they didn't fight for it. And the most heartbreaking part? They realize all of this without the certainty that they will ever experience it again. Because the truth, now painfully clear, is that your love wasn't just another chapter. It was a turning point. It was an awakening. It was a connection that marked them forever. And no matter what happens going forward, they know one thing with absolute clarity: your love was the kind that only happens once, and they may never feel anything like it again. They sit quietly with the knowledge of what they've lost, and for the first time it hits them fully. They may have been too late. The realization is heavy, almost suffocating, because while they can remember every touch, every word, every laugh, and every moment of comfort you gave, they also understand that time has moved forward. The person they once held in their arms, the one who loved them so completely and without condition, has grown. You have healed in ways they never anticipated, strengthened in ways they didn't imagine, and perhaps even learned to protect your heart from the very patterns they created. And they feel the sting of knowing that the love they ignored is no longer waiting for them to come back. It exists independently now, flourishing in the strength and self-respect you've cultivated. This is a hard truth for them to swallow, because avoidance doesn't allow for regret in the moment. They are conditioned to distract, to push away, to rationalize. But now, with all distractions gone, they feel it, the deep, unshakable longing for something they no longer control. They feel the ache of knowing that someone else's heart, once open to them so freely, may now be closed to their return. And in that moment, they begin to confront the magnitude of their mistakes. They feel a quiet panic, not a dramatic scream, not a desperate act, but a persistent internal whisper that echoes through every decision, every interaction, and every fleeting moment of solitude. They replay memories over and over, more vivid than ever, noticing details they never acknowledged before. The softness in your voice, the patience in your eyes, the warmth that seemed to flow from you without hesitation. Every small gesture that once seemed ordinary now glows with significance. They recognize the stability you offered in a life full of chaos, the unwavering presence you maintained when they were inconsistent and afraid. And they feel it, the knowledge that no one they encounter now will ever replicate that kind of love. Not because others are incapable, but because what you shared was unique, born from the connection they failed to appreciate. It hits them hardest in the quiet moments, when the day ends and the world fades into stillness. In those moments they are left with themselves, their thoughts, and the echoes of your care. They feel the absence of someone who understood them without needing them to explain every fear, every hesitation, every guarded wall. They feel the absence of someone who could make them feel safe without asking for reciprocity. Someone who could mirror their best qualities and accept their worst without judgment. And they realize how rare that kind of love is. It isn't something you stumble upon, it's something you earn, something you nurture, something you allow to exist fully. They try to fill the void with other people, other distractions, other attempts at connection, but everything feels hollow. Conversations lack the depth they now crave. Affection feels conditional, hesitant, incomplete. Every new face becomes a reminder that the love they lost cannot be manufactured. It wasn't in the gestures, the gifts, or the casual kindness. It was in the unwavering consistency, the emotional presence, and the profound understanding that only you could give. They feel it in the subtle moments when someone laughs too loudly, smiles too superficially, or fails to notice the silent things their heart wants to express. And in those moments they are reminded that no one will ever love them like you did. They start to understand that avoidance wasn't a flaw in them, it was a protection. It was a shield against something they didn't know how to handle, real unfiltered intimacy. But now the irony becomes unbearable. The very shield that once protected them from feeling too much is now the barrier that prevents them from reclaiming what they lost. The walls they built to feel safe now keep them from experiencing the only love that ever truly mattered. And they feel the sting of this truth, the bittersweet clarity that comes from finally seeing what they threw away. Memories shift from nostalgia to revelation. They remember every argument they never resolved, every time they withdrew when they should have leaned in, every refusal to allow closeness when what you offered was a sanctuary. They realize that love isn't about perfection, it's about presence, understanding, and willingness to grow together. And in those memories they recognize that they had all of that before, but they weren't ready to receive it. And now they may never get the chance to receive it again. They feel a quiet desperation rising within them, not the kind that prompts dramatic gestures, but the kind that lives inside, persistent and inescapable. They feel the longing for a connection that no other person can give. They feel the void left by someone who truly saw them, understood them, and loved them without hesitation. They feel the realization that no one else can mirror the emotional resonance you created. They feel the painful understanding that what they dismissed as overwhelming was actually essential, transformative, and irreplaceable. And with this understanding comes a subtle transformation. They see themselves more clearly now, not with judgment, not with anger, but with awareness. They understand that their fear, their avoidance and their withdrawal were part of a pattern, a survival mechanism that once served them, but now has consequences they cannot ignore. They feel the weight of responsibility for what they lost and the clarity that comes from seeing the difference between what is fleeting and what is enduring. At the same time, they begin to recognize something else. Your presence in their life was never about perfection. It was about authenticity. It was about the courage to love without expectation, to stay without forcing, to hold space without demanding. And they see now that such love cannot be replicated. It can only be experienced once, deeply, and then remembered forever. They feel the ache of losing that, and the understanding that while they may encounter many people, few will ever inspire the same sense of security, peace and belonging that your love once provided. They start to reflect on the lessons they carry now. They recognize that love requires courage, that presence matters more than gestures, that understanding and patience are rarities, and that connection is not something to be taken lightly. They see that the emotional depth they once feared is the very thing that shapes fulfillment, intimacy, and growth. And in this reflection, they feel both regret and revelation, regret for what they lost, and revelation for what they now understand too late. At times, they feel a pang of fear, fear that you may have moved on, fear that you no longer wait for what they never fully embraced, fear that the love they once dismissed has evolved beyond their reach. And yet this fear is intertwined with longing, a longing that drives them to examine their own capacity for change, their own readiness to engage with love, their own desire to reconnect not just with you but with the depth of feeling they avoided for so long. Even now, they wonder if reaching out would change anything. They weigh the consequences of their absence against the impossibility of recreating what you offered. They consider whether timing is truly everything, or if some love once lost exists only as a memory, a template for what cannot be duplicated. They recognize that what they once took for granted is now a standard against which all others will be measured. And they feel the unmistakable truth: no one will ever love them like you did. And yet, in the midst of this recognition, they begin to grow. They begin to learn the weight of emotional responsibility. They begin to understand the importance of presence, of patience, of understanding. They start to see the consequences of avoidance not as punishment, but as lessons, lessons they can carry into every interaction, every future relationship, every choice they make. They feel a quiet humility that comes from realizing the depth of what they lost, paired with the awareness that they cannot erase it. In the end, they are left with the memory of your love, profound, transformative, irreplaceable. They are left with the echo of what it felt like to be understood without explanation, held without demand, loved without condition. And they are left with themselves, reflective, aware and changed in ways they never could have anticipated. They feel the regret, the longing, the truth, but also the clarity that comes from finally seeing the emotional reality of what they lost. And while they may never fully regain what you once offered, they cannot deny its impact. It lingers in their heart, shaping their understanding of love, connection, and intimacy. It teaches them, it haunts them, it transforms them. And through it all, one undeniable truth stands above all: the love they walked away from, the connection they failed to nurture, the presence they could not embrace. No one will ever love them like you did.